Welcome back to the American Legends Watch channel. Today I'm going to be resurrecting my old Seiko Kinetic watch. Wore it every day for probably 10-15 years till the little capacitor inside basically died, wouldn't keep it charged anymore. So after trying to get Seiko to replace it for me and couldn't get anywhere with them, I found the right replacement capacitor to put in myself. And I recorded the process, edited out the slow parts, so now I'm just going to walk you through what needs to be done. So first, here's the watch. If you flip it over, I'll just pause it right here. You can see the information on the back. You can see the information about the movement. If you have a Seiko Kinetic and do the same thing, which I presume is why you're here, you'll see the model number, some information about the movement number, and that's what you need to find the correct capacitor for you. I'll put some links in the description of where you can find those. I bought the one I used here off of eBay. So first things first, I did take the bracelet loose. I took off the little piece that keeps the micro adjust in the clasp is the part that I took loose. And you'll definitely want to do that so you have an unobstructed access there to the back of the watch. And then I'm using this case opener tool to carefully unscrew the case back. And let's just pause here for a second. And if you are not comfortable in taking your bracelet loose or taking the case back off, please do not try to replace the capacitor yourself, because the rest of this gets a lot trickier. So once that is loose, then you're going to be in position to put that to the side, and be careful with the gasket that is, at least in my Seiko Kinetic model, it's got a rubber gasket. I presume most of the Seiko Kinetics will likewise. Because of the age of the watch, I also ordered a replacement gasket at the same time that I ordered a replacement capacitor. And here now we've got the movement exposed, and our first task is now to remove the rotor. And you need to be very careful here that you don't put too much pressure on that screw, or you risk pushing the spindle in the middle that holds the hands all the way up to the crystal, which will ruin it. So you want to be very careful there not to put too much pressure. And it's also a very, very small screw, a very, very narrow notch in it. So you need to use your most narrow screwdriver. Some people use a razor blade. Please be careful if you do that. Once that screws out, you can carefully lift the rotor out of the way, and then this little gear needs to come off very carefully, and I'm putting it in a little magnetized dish there so things don't go flying away. All right, at this point, we are looking at the movement, and we have two small screws that we need to get loose to get access to the capacitor. And my same very, very small flathead screwdriver, what I'm using here, is the smallest one that I have. A very narrow edge to that screwdriver. And it's also a magnetized screwdriver, which really helps with this little tiny screw. Once it's loose, it's going to stay magnetically on the tip of the screwdriver, and then I will transfer it over to that same dish. There it goes. So it won't go anywhere and I won't lose it. There it is. All right, we've got one more there toward the top of the capacitor. Make sure we're right in the groove. And that kind of screwdriver has an end on it where you can kind of hold the end of the screwdriver and spin the middle, which is very handy. You have a screwdriver set like that. All right, at this point, this metal retainer clip is now loose. My kit with the capacitor came with the new one, so I'm going to remove this one, put it to the side. When it comes time, I'll just use the new one, and just kind of pause it there for a second because it was hard to see. But the insulator that comes with the capacitor, when I just took that top metal retainer off, the insulator was kind of stuck to it, so it was hard to see there. I'll zoom in so you can see that. In the kit that comes with the new parts, that insulator is separate And it's going to be tricky, as you will see, to get that in the right spot. But now that that is out of the way, the capacitor itself is available to take out. There's really nothing holding it in there, but you can just get right underneath either leg of that capacitor, move that to the side, and now we're ready for the new kit. So here's the new kit I got, again, off eBay after I looked up the right part number. As far as I can tell, the capacitors that they sell now have a lithium-ion chemistry, which is an upgrade from the chemistry that was in the original capacitor, although I haven't found anyone for sure that will tell me exactly what the original chemistry was. It seems to behave differently with these new capacitors. It has a much longer power reserve, but the power reserve indicator of the watch isn't as accurate to tell you how much it's charged. Overall, I consider it to be an upgrade, but the power reserve just tends to go about 2/3 of the way all the time. It never really gets all the way. So anyways, here's the new kit. Remove that carefully from the packaging. There's the new metal retainer clip that it came with. There's the new capacitor itself, which comes with the little lugs already welded to it, and then there's the new insulator. And it comes with, at least mine came with 2 little pieces of little craft paper in there that seemed to really do anything. Maybe at one point they were attached to either side of the capacitor, but they're not needed. Very important here, by the way, that you do not use tweezers to handle this capacitor. If you use metal tweezers, you will short it out and you'll ruin it. So you'll notice I'm handling the capacitor. I dropped it there, but I'm handling it completely by hand and not with metal tweezers in order to avoid that potentially disastrous problem. Just get it oriented the right way with those 2 soldered metal lugs on either side facing up, just as it was when I took it out. Note that that is the opposite of most quartz watches, where you have the other side, the flat side of the battery facing up. This is the back side normally of the battery. This is not technically a battery, it's a capacitor. Once that's installed, then comes the tricky part of putting the insulator in the right place. And the insulator is very, very thin. There's very little mass. It will blow away easily in the wind. I'll be very gentle here as I take it out of the packaging to get it in my fingers, and then to be able to place it right back where the old one goes. And it's going to want to stick there in the plastic, but I'm not using a knife or anything else to get it out. I'm going to be very, very gentle with that little insulator. And again, I'm just using my fingers to manipulate it with. I wouldn't have enough dexterity wearing any kind of gloves to do this, so I'm just using my bare hands. And the oils from my finger, I don't think were any issue for the conductivity of the capacitor. There we go, just gently putting that in place, lining it up, and then once I kind of got to the limit of what my fingers could do, I did use my little screwdriver to just do a little delicate manipulation to get it exactly where I wanted it. And I used a loop to look at it, make sure I liked where it was. And most importantly, when you put the metal retainer back on, that insulator needs to line up exactly with that metal retainer. If you really see any edges of the insulator, it's not in the right place. You shouldn't really be able to see it at all. You see that brownish orange plastic over the top of the capacitor or sticking out on the sides more than 0.5 millimeter. You probably need to take the retainer clip back off and readjust that insulator. Do that as many times as it takes until you really got it lined up. Otherwise, the retainer clip is sitting straight on top of the capacitor. I'm sure it would cause a short, and you definitely want to avoid that. Now comes the trickiest part for me, was actually getting the tiny little screws started. So I used my tweezers here to pull the little screw off of my magnetic dish, get the first little screw to the right hole, and I'm using my fingers just to keep that retainer clip and the insulator from moving around while I do this. So keeping one finger there as long as I can, and ultimately looks like I needed to use my magnetized screwdriver. This was very tricky. This took me several attempts with each of these 2 screws to get them started. There we go again. I edited out most of this, but you can tell how delicate and how tricky this is. At this point, I got out a separate screwdriver that is not magnetized, because I had a problem that my magnetized screwdriver kept pulling the screw out or pulling it at an angle before I could start screwing it. So I switched to this non-magnetized little screwdriver that I had. Came with the same kit that I got this little movement holder that's holding the watch head in place. And you can pick one of those kits up from Amazon. I'll put a link below for at least one of those. You'll definitely want a movement holder and not let the watch head be sliding around your desk while you're doing this. At this point, with 1 screw in there, now the second screw wasn't quite so bad because now the retainer clip doesn't want to go anywhere. The insulator's pretty well in place now. It's not going to go anywhere, but just getting this screw started, very tricky. Edit some of that out. Use my fingertip there. Once I see the top of the screw head and it looks good, then I can use my non-magnetized screwdriver to start the process of actually screwing that in. Very gently. Of course, you don't want to put too much pressure. You don't want to put too much torque. You're just barely tightening each of these screws. And after I put the rotor back in, I'm going to go back to these 2 little screws and just make sure that they are finger tight. But for right now, we're in good shape. We've got both of these screws. Just double checking those. And feeling good. We got the capacitor in. It's now secured. Making sure those screws are finger tight. Trickiest part for me were those 2 little screws. All right, now we're ready for the little gear. So having to be very gentle pulling that out of my magnetic dish. That little gear, you need to make sure it's like a hat that is oriented in the correct direction, and it's got a couple of little notches it will gently fall into to make it mesh with the gears below. So once that little gear is set, then the rotor, as far as I can tell, doesn't matter what orientation it is in. It doesn't have any notches. So I'm just trying to be careful, making sure that it didn't appear oily or dusty underneath. I'm sure I'm getting some fingerprints on it at this point, but I'll try to polish those off with cloth after I've got this all centered. Pull out the last screw from the little dish. Use my magnetized screwdriver to get it to the hole in lieu of tweezers. If you have little tweezers, I'm sure you could use little tweezers for that as well. And then my non-magnetized screwdriver, again, very helpful. Try to tighten more with my smaller screwdriver. Again, the slot in that screw is extra super narrow. I'm going to clean off the case back. I'm going to clean off the movement itself using a little same kit here. Came with that yellow microfiber cleaning cloth. So just trying to get any dust off of there. That's a camera lens brush that I use just to get lint off of stuff. Give the same treatment here to the case back. Polish the inside and the outside. It's not really polishing. I'm just wiping the dust off. Some of the Kinetic watches will have a see-through case back. Some won't. If yours is just a metal back, I just would do the same thing. Get any dust out of there before you put everything back together. That's a mineral crystal. So just wiping any residual fingerprints off of there. And at this point, put that down and get out the new gasket. Again, not absolutely necessary, but having run into this issue in the past, just gives me more peace of mind that I'll have the correct water resistance, which on this watch originally it's rated at 100 and think 100 meters. That's what it says on here. In any event, I first tried to put the case back on with the gasket, and the gasket kept trying to fall off the case back. I didn't like trying to line up the gasket on the watch head itself and then try to put the glass back on there, the case back. So what I wound up doing here is I tried there to line up the gasket. I didn't like that. That did not look secure at all. So what I wound up doing is taking that gasket off, putting it on the case back, then taking the watch head out of this holder, flipping it upside down so that the gasket was resting on the case back, and then I could just screw the two together safely, and that worked best for me. You know, if the gasket were a little tighter and just held onto there, that would be fine. Another trick I've used not for watches, but for similar gaskets and other contraptions is just a little bit of Vaseline will hold a gasket like that in place and will retain the water resistance. But here I go. I'm removing the watch from the holder now to try this, and this is ultimately what's going to work. You know, nothing's going to fall out when I hold the watch head upside down. This is just allowing the gasket to stay on the case back while I then get that started. And once I have it started with my fingers, and you can tell the watch is already moving. You can see the second hand ticking away. These kinetic movements are hybrid movement. They're they're a quartz movement, but instead of being powered by a battery, that capacitor is being charged by the movement of the rotor inside, similar to how a automatic mechanical movement would work. They don't make these anymore because this issue, that capacitor just doesn't last forever. If you want to avoid the hassle of replacing a battery, getting a solar powered movement is a much better choice. If you want to see through case back with the rotor, you might as well go mechanical. There it is. Tighten it up with the case back removal tool. Wipe off any remaining fingerprints. And then all I'm going to need to do is set the time correctly, set the date, put the bracelet back together, and more or less good as new. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you find it useful. If you have tips, suggestions, if you've done this yourself, maybe made a mistake and regretted it, having trouble with one of these steps, I'll keep an eye on the comments, and I'll try to answer as many as I can with whatever answers I have. And here's a little strap removal tool I'm going to use here to put that pin back in. A little trickier to put it back in than it was to put it in to get it off, because that pin just wants to slide out of the notch there. And I didn't make a note of which of the micro adjustment holes it was in, so I'm taking a guess here, putting it in this particular micro adjustment hole, but easy enough to move around. And once you get one end started, then you can use this strap removal tool and the little forked end to get in there, depress that pin just enough to sneak it underneath. And then once it's underneath the clasp, then you can just gently scoot it over into the right place. And this is stamped clasp. Some of the newer, nicer Seikos have fully milled clasp these days, but back here around 2000, 2001, that's what they were doing. So setting the time, giving a little shake, charge up that capacitor, Seiko shuffle they call it. And after having done this, I've been wearing it here for a couple of days, and It's running great. The only issue, again, I see that's different from when it was new is that power reserve indicator. Just that top pusher you see on this model is a power reserve where it moves the second hand. And if it is, when it was fully charged with the original capacitor, that would move, 180 degrees from where the second hand was. And right now it's only moving like 100 degrees. It's moving about 2/3 of the way. And I think that that's due to the different chemistry that's in this capacitor, that it's a lithium ion now. It's probably going to last longer. From what I've read, it has a much longer power reserve. But there you go. There's my Seiko Kinetic. Back to life. Back from the dead. Hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, please like or subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.